Hi, today we're going to talk about how to bring more butterflies to your garden and have them stay around. To do that, we need to understand a little bit about the life cycle of a butterfly. So they go through a process called metamorphosis, which is a complete change of their body structure over a period of time. They start as an egg, which hatches into a caterpillar or larvae stage. Each butterfly is going to go through periods of growth where they shed their skin and grow larger. These are called instar stages. And finally, they form a chrysalis, where after a period of time, which is really dependent on temperature, they'll transform or morph from a caterpillar into a butterfly. Here you can see the monarch, which starts off with a little jewel-like chrysalis in green, gradually getting darker, and on a very warm weather, this can happen in under 7 days, whereas in cooler weather, it can take 12 to 14 days. It will then show its colors and burst out. And today we're going to learn how to support the butterfly, both at the adult and the larval stage. Let's start with the adult stage, because this is when they're easiest to spot in your garden. So what do they need? Well, they need shelter, sunny spots, and a puddling spot. A sunny spot, they're kind of like the car and the oil in your engine. The fluid in their wings solidifies overnight and they can't fly, so they need to sit in the sun and flutter their wings a little to get it all moving. They need shelter because they need a place to go for the night, a sunny spot to warm up, a roosting place to nap during the day, and somewhere to get away from predators. So you'd like to have some trees, shrubs, or larger, bushier perennials around to supply these functions. Now, unlike birds, butterflies don't necessarily need a butterfly bath, but they can get all the water needs from the dew that's on the leaves or the nectar they're drinking from the plants. But what they do like and need is a puddling place. They'll drink from a mud puddle not to get water, but for the minerals in the mud that are essential to their growth and also their breeding. So instead of a bird bath, you can make a mud bath for them in a plant saucer. It shouldn't be wet enough to attract mosquitoes. And if you have a fireplace and burn some wood, you can add a little ash to the mud mixture. Now, adult butterflies need food that's really heavy in sugar content, and that's satisfied mostly with the nectar from a plant. Nectar is different than pollen, even though we call butterflies pollinators. Pollen is a protein and nectar is a carbohydrate. And different plants have different nectar contents. So what we're going to look at next is some of the flowers that grow really well in this area of Delaware and are high in nectar to attract and feed butterflies. A key to keeping butterflies around throughout the whole summer is to have food sources for them throughout all the seasons. In the very early spring, the butterflies that overwinter here are usually sipping nectar from trees, which have really small but very high content nectar flowers. There are also butterflies that feed on the running sap in the very, very early spring. Once you get into spring, bee balm, and that's the top picture here, this purple one is called Monarda fistulosa. It is one of the highest rated nectar plants per flower. The middle plant is verbena. Now, verbena comes in an annual, a biennial, and a perennial species that can bloom in the spring through the summer and right into the late fall. It's also very versatile in your garden as it comes in a low ground cover, a mid-height, and tall varieties. And of the tall flowering varieties, verbena comes in both two native species, which are Verbena hastata for a wet site and Verbena stricta for a dry site, and also a non-native species, which is Verbena bonariensis, which looks great coming up through other plants. Now the bottom one is heliotrope, which is not a native. It is a summer blooming annual, and it's also often found in hanging baskets. It loves the heat of summertime and just does really well in the high humidity here in Delaware. While it is non-native, it can go in hanging baskets and pots, and the butterflies just love it. Are you noticing that many of these flowers are purple? That's the butterfly's favorite color. Now, moving into the seasons, Coreopsis is the top plant here. It's one of the most hybridized flowers, and it comes in an annual as well as perennial forms. Just make sure to look for the flat single flower types for attracting butterflies, and make sure it's not a sterile variety, which will have no pollen and be very low in nectar. The middle plant is goldenrods. These are very rich in nectar and a great fall staple for butterflies that are trying to build up for overwintering. Goldenrod is not what makes you sneeze in the fall, that is ragweed. And goldenrod native species come in many different sizes and shapes. Lantana is a non-native tropical annual, but bright and colorful and has a large fluorescence that's made up of hundreds of tiny little flowers, each one full of nectar. What this does is it allows the butterfly to graze without changing flowers as much, thereby saving energy. It'll also bloom all summer into the fall in the heat and humidity of Delaware, and it makes a great filler in a potted arrangement. Asters are a fall staple and come in shades of purple to pink and even blue. Purple is the butterfly's favorite color, with red being their least attractive color. Asters tend to like a moister soil, so if your soil is drier, try for afternoon shade. Black-eyed Susans, Rebecca, will keep blooming all season, June to October, if you deadhead them and prune them back. They come in perennial, biennial, and annual forms. Many of the annual forms, though, are hybridized, and there's series such as Sunset and Cherry, and they're just not as attractive because of the red coloring to the butterflies. Butterfly weed, which is Asclepias tuberosa, the orange one in the lower left, is in the milkweed family and likes very dry, sandy soil. It blooms in June through August, and the butterflies just love it. Echinacea, or purple cone flower, is currently the most hybridized native plant, but they're breeding it for things that don't necessarily make it attractive to butterflies. Butterflies like a nice flat landing pad and easy access to the nectar. So double varieties make it very hard for the butterfly to get to the nectar. Sedums are a good fall bloomer that are very drought tolerant, very good in our sandy soils here in Delaware. They have succulent leaves that withstand the hot days of August, and they thrive in the heat to produce blooms well into October. Zinnias are butterfly magnets, very high in nectar content per flower if you use the single varieties. The more petals there are, which are actually sterile ray discs, the less nectar there is in a zinnia. And zinnias with deadheading will bloom from May to October. While they're not a native plant, they are a great filler in a border or in a pot, and they come in all heights. Just remember to get the ones with the center disc and the single rays along the outside. Now, a butterfly is going to go from flower to flower and sip the nectar, so try to plant more than one of each kind of plant. The rule of thumb is to plant in uneven numbers, 3, 5, 7, and make a large color swath. This is an example of a border garden. It has large planted plots of each flower and 5 to 7 different annuals that'll bloom at different times. Annuals such as lantana, heliotrope, and verbena can be planted in pots and moved around the garden to fill in areas that have finished blooming. And just remember, plants in pots need to be watered more often than those in the ground. Well, now that we've got the adult butterflies coming around, the key is how do you keep them here so that they're not just doing a flyby to grab the nectar out of your yard. Well, in order to do this, you need to have food for their babies. Many butterflies are what we call specialists when it comes to feeding their young. And that means they look for a certain plant to lay their eggs on, so the baby caterpillar will have food immediately upon hatching. This is a monarch laying her egg on a milkweed. Milkweed is the host plant for the monarch caterpillar, meaning it's the only food that they will eat. The female monarch will land on a plant and taste it with her feet. If it's the right plant and there are no other eggs on it, she will try to lay only one egg per plant because she knows that her baby caterpillar will consume the entire plant over the course of its caterpillar instars. If there's not enough milkweed available, she will lay more than one egg on each plant and hope they survive. Different butterflies have different host plants for their larval stage. So let's look at some of the most common butterflies we see in this area in Delaware and what they'll be looking for in your garden as a baby nursery. Well, as we mentioned, the monarch will only eat milkweed, but there are 9 species of milkweed that are native to Delaware, and pretty much one for every type of environment that you have in your yard. Common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca, is the butterfly's favorite food, but it needs a large space as it spreads through underground runners as well as seeds, and it can be invasive. A better alternative, if you can find it, is purple milkweed, Asclepias purpurea. It's very similar to common milkweed, but not nearly as aggressive, and the butterflies seem to like it just as well. Swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata, is not as aggressive, and it likes a really moist to wet environment. It can do part shade, but not too much. Then butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa, is the opposite and likes a really sunny, dry, sandy spot. As I mentioned before, the monarch chrysalis looks like a little jewel with its light green and gold, and the caterpillar is very distinctively marked. This is the viceroy, and it's known as the mimicry butterfly. It mimics the colors of the monarch in its wings to say, "Don't eat me, I eat poisonous plants." While it doesn't eat poisonous plants, it is still very unpalatable. It's just not poisonous. Its babies thrive on the leaves of the trees of aspen, cherry, willow, poplar, plum, and apple. So the viceroy can be supported in your garden by planting trees, which is an alternative for butterfly planting. It also uses mimicry in its caterpillar stage. As you can see here, the caterpillar looks a little bit like bird poop sitting on a branch. And the chrysalis also has a large dollop of what looks like bird poop cloaking it from predators. Another one we commonly see here is the American painted lady. Now, the American painted lady is not as much of a specialist as the others are. It looks for plants that we would normally label as weeds to feed its larvae. It'll feed on many plants in the aster family known as composites, i.e. those big flat sterile ray discs with the flat centers, and it particularly likes thistle, daisies, and everlastings for its larvae. Black swallowtails, unlike the monarch, will lay hundreds of eggs on plants and just hope for the survival of the fittest. They like plants in the wild carrot family, such as dill, fennel, parsley, carrots, and this also includes Queen Anne's lace, a weed that has a nice flat flower that's full of nectar. The caterpillar coloring is similar to the monarch, but has dots of yellow instead of bands and no white bands separating its segments. Their chrysalis attached to a branch at the bottom with a silk thread that extends them from the branch versus many other butterflies that hang downward in a J form from the branch. Swallowtails also overwinter on the branch in their chrysalis, and therefore they're one of the first to appear in the spring. In the same family is the eastern tiger swallowtail, but they prefer trees such as wild cherry, ash, and tulip, and the leaves of the spice bush for its larvae to eat. The 4th and 5th larval instars of the caterpillar are often mistaken for the spice bush swallowtail caterpillar, but the differences are the large eye spots on the spice bush and the markings along its body that give it that snake-like appearance. And again, notice that the chrysalis is attached at the bottom and hangs at the top from a thread. The variegated fritillary is most beautiful in its larval stage. As an adult, it's pretty nondescript brown and tan butterfly. But as a caterpillar, it's this orange, red, black, and white, and it bears painful looking spines along its side. The chrysalis is a light sea green color with bronze and gold markings. It's truly a little jewel. This is one that was in our demo garden last year. Fritillaries love passion flowers, which is a vining plant that's very easy to start from seeds, violets, pansies, and plantains. Plantains and violets are generally considered lawn weeds. And there are 20 species of violets that are found here in Delaware, and all but 2 of them are native. And you can go to the DelawareWildflowers.org to find out all these native plants and the violets. So now that you have nectar plants for the adults and host plants for the babies, what else can you do to keep them in your landscape? Well, one of the things is reduce your lawn. Lawn is high maintenance. It uses high water, fertilizers, and it offers no nectar, host food, or shelter for the butterflies. And unless you have a lot of clover growing in your grass or weeds, the butterflies will tend to avoid it as they're very easy prey when they're spotlighted against that green flat lawn. Leave some natural areas if you have a larger property. Remember, many of these butterflies use what we consider weeds as a host food. It is what they have evolved with over millions of years. If you have a very small property or HOA restrictions on things like meadows, pick a specific butterfly to attract, such as the black swallowtail, and plant parsley, dill, or fennel in pots, and then an annual, such as zinnia or lantana for nectar. These will all keep on blooming all season long if deadheaded, and if you plant it, they will come. Don't use pesticides. This includes herbicides, as the caterpillars are going to be eating the leaf. If you want a lot of caterpillars, you're going to have to live with your leaves being chewed. It will not kill the plant. I have had my milkweed completely, every leaf eaten off it, and every year the plant comes back with more and more stems on it. Now, while we always hear about the migration of the monarchs 3,000 miles to Mexico, the fact is that many of the butterflies we just talked about live right here in Delaware over the winter as either butterflies, in the chrysalis, or in the egg stage. So leave your cleanup until the spring. If you have a wood pile, place a plastic layer under the top 1 or 2 layers of wood, and this will help keep your lower wood dry and provide a nesting spot for overwintering bees and butterflies. Leave the leaf litter under the spice bush and your trees. Of course, if you need to prune off broken branches or clean up diseased leaves, please do so. But if you clean out all the debris from your garden in the fall, most likely you're throwing away some eggs, chrysalis, or even some butterflies. Any questions? This is from one of my favorite t-shirts.